So, a few months ago, Jurassic World Dominion finished filming, and it's now set to be released in June 2022. And I'd be lying if I said I wasn't nervous about it. Jurassic Park is one of my favorite movies of all time. With Sam Neill, Laura Dern, and Jeff Goldblum set to return to the franchise with major roles in this film, I'm afraid we won't see a story worthy of those characters. For me, the films in the Jurassic World franchise have just felt really weak in comparison to the original film. And before anyone else thinks, ugh, he's just blinded by nostalgia and nothing will ever be as good as the original to him because of that, I'll have you know that I didn't see any of the Jurassic Park movies until around 2015, and so I saw Jurassic Park and Jurassic World within like a week of each other. And honestly, I just remember feeling pretty dissatisfied after seeing Jurassic World, but I wasn't really sure why. But now, after a lot of time to reflect and a lot of film classes, I've been able to put my dissatisfaction into words, and in many ways, I think the faults of Jurassic World reflect the problems with a lot of modern blockbusters. I'm sure most of you watching this have probably heard about Martin Scorsese's recent essay, Il Maestro, but for anyone who hasn't, I'll just give a quick recap. In his essay, Scorsese talks about his relationship with filmmaker Federico Fellini and his many films. As he goes through some of his favorite works by Fellini, he highlights the magic of cinema present in Fellini's work that he feels is just lost by today's content-based filmmaking, which I think is really pertinent to the Jurassic Park Jurassic World comparison, as he fears that cinema has become a mass visual entertainment business. The emphasis is always on the word business, and value is determined by the amount of money to be made from any given property, which turns movies into content and not films. And I'm not trying to act like Jurassic Park is like anywhere near any of Fellini's movies or even Scorsese's movies in the same way, but I think the ingenuity and originality of the original film comes way closer to that ideal than Jurassic World just ever has. Jurassic World was made to make money. Like a lot of money. And I mean, it did. It became the third highest grossing movie ever in 2015. And therefore, it just feels like a movie whose only goal is to make money. So on that note, here's some reasons I think Jurassic World just doesn't hold up when compared to the original, and in many of the same ways that the modern blockbuster just seems to fall apart. For every Jurassic World character, there's pretty much a similar corresponding character in the original franchise, though some characters can represent multiple characters from the original. Owen is like Alan, Claire is part Ellie, part Hammond, Masrani is entirely Hammond, Zach and Gray are Lex and Tim, Lowry is Ray, Barry is Muldoon, Vic is Gennaro. I mean, I could go on and on and on. Oh, and Wu is Wu, in case that wasn't clear. But the difference is that every character in Jurassic Park has a lot more depth to them, and all play an important role in the film. A quick example would be the two child leads of the film. Both kids are brought to the island by a relative who works at the park, and both have the geeky, dinosaur-loving one as well as the older, snarkier sibling. And first off, Lex and Tim just make more sense being in the film. They help Alan's character arc. And while Zach and Gray assist Claire, her arc is more focused on her disillusionment with the park, and her realization for more family time is less touched upon. Especially because, aside from a 1-minute conversation, Zach and Gray don't even meet up with the film's protagonist until about an hour and a half in. The Jurassic Park kids also just have a lot more to do in the film. Their presence is justified in the film, as Tim's dinosaur knowledge proves to be useful to the characters, and Lex is responsible for getting the park back online by the film's end. The Jurassic World kids are just kind of there. At most, they let the audience see the park as a tourist, but narratively, they don't really do anything to progress the story. They're just sort of a MacGuffin to get Claire and Owen into the wild and into the action of the movie. Another example is John Hammond versus Simon Masrani. And before we dive into this comparison, I just want to do a little pre-comparison with the character of Hammond from the original Jurassic Park book. So when I first read the book, I noticed that a lot of characters were slightly tweaked when Michael Crane turned his book into a screenplay. And one of the biggest changes is Hammond. In the book, Hammond feels much more like a Jeff Bezos billionaire than the endearing grandfather of the films. His primary motivation for the park is to just make a lot of money. And even after the book's climax and everyone's safe, he plans to start over and make the park again, until he trips over a root, falls down a hill, injures himself, and is still eaten by compies. Yeah, what do you deserve, I guess. But you can contrast this to the Hammond portrayed by Richard Attenborough, who explains that he
I wanted to show them something that wasn't an illusion. Something that was real. Something that they could see and touch.
And though in this scene he wants to make the park again, by the film's end, he realizes that he needs to abandon the idea of Jurassic Park. And though the book's version is probably a more realistic depiction of a one-percenter, the film gives the character room to grow and become much more of a tragic figure whose optimism is taken away by the dark events of the film, which just makes him a lot more interesting to watch as the film progresses. Now, let's look at Masrani. For the owner of the park, he plays a pretty minor role in the film. We don't really know much about him, and he doesn't really have any growth other than that he maybe gets better at flying a helicopter until he doesn't. One might think that Jurassic Park has better written characters because it had the book as source material, but as I said, a lot of these characters were changed around when the film was adapted. Obviously, Hammond just got changed, but even more central characters like Alan Grant were changed. I mean, let's just compare these two parts of the different Jurassic Park stories. Grant liked kids. It was impossible not to like any group so openly enthusiastic about dinosaurs.
I mean, what's so wrong with kids?
Oh, Ellie, look, they're noisy, they're messy, they're expensive.
Cheap.
They smell.
They do not
Some of them smell. Babies smell.
So what I think Jurassic Park really does that helps the characters develop is that other than the film's opening, which sets the tone for the film, there really isn't much action until about an hour in. And this gives the characters room to grow and be fleshed out and time to interact with each other. And as they get to know each other, so does the audience. Whereas the poop hits the fan about 35 minutes into Jurassic World, so the audience doesn't really get enough time to meet these characters, especially because that time is split between different characters' plot lines. As I said before, Zach and Gray don't meet up with Owen and Claire until an hour and a half into the film, and even Owen and Claire don't share a scene with each other until half an hour into the movie. So that time to introduce everyone before the action is split 3 ways, and let alone when you consider the side characters that are also introduced. Jurassic World tries to make up for this lack of time with characters by making them stock characters that the audience will already know from other media. Owen is the classic rub some dirt in it motorcycle riding guy. Claire's an uptight business lady. Zach and Gray are the mean, cool older brother and the geeky younger brother. And this way, through prior knowledge, the characters are already established to the audience, and the movie can just spend less time on them. As well, characters like Alan and Hammond have compelling character arcs that they progress through as the film goes on, whereas their counterparts Owen and Masrani don't really change throughout the film. The only one who I think has any significant character arc in Jurassic World is Claire, but even so at times it feels like her arc gets lost in all the chaos of the film. This highlights a problem in most blockbusters today, because studios think it'll bring in more money if they're focused on the spectacle rather than the stories and the characters that make up that story. So while Jurassic World's storyline was subpar, they do their best to hide this under some crazy and exciting violence. Jurassic Park builds tension and fear in its scenes. I mean, look at the first scene with the T-Rex versus the first scene with the Indominus Rex. First, the cars stop. Then, all the electric fences start to become unarmed. Then we hear footsteps, then the goat's missing. We see it's been attacked, see the T-Rex claw on the wire, and then we get our first real glance at its head above the fence as it swallows the goat, and chaos ensues. And even then, it doesn't actually eat anyone until tension is further built. From early on, Jurassic World introduces the Indominus Rex, which you think would give it the upper hand, but instead of building up that fear in its audience through rising actions like its predecessor, it just kind of tells you how scared of it you should be.
Think it'll scare the kids?
The kids? This'll give the parents nightmares.
Until the opportunity arises for it to just kind of immediately start eating people. Instead of trying to make the audience feel the same fear as the characters on screen, Jurassic World just tells you that you should be afraid. This kind of ostentatious action is present throughout the movie to try and get a cheap thrill out of its viewer. And it seems as though movies that were once praised for their high quality in all aspects, the blockbuster's quality now seems to be confined to its technical merits. These same technical merits that they used to get the cheap thrills to provide realistic action. Jurassic Park's most flashy death is probably Donald Gennaro's, where he's eaten while hiding out on a toilet. I mean, in the book he pees his pants, so it could have been worse for him. But that awful death is earned by the character for being extremely greedy and selfish. Whereas in Jurassic World, Claire's assistant Zara gets probably the most flashy and gruesome death in the entire franchise, because she didn't take good enough care of Claire's nephews who ran away from her. I get that she's like on the phone and like not paying attention, but I mean, she was doing what Claire neglected to do in the first place. If anything, Claire deserves that punishment more than her. They're not her nephews. But Jurassic World doesn't think that way. It just wants to be a spectacle. It doesn't want you to think about why these two random kids are in a weird glass orb, and why for some reason Zach is intent on cheating on his girlfriend that doesn't actually go anywhere in the movie. Instead, it just says, look, Jimmy Fallon's here for some reason. This technique of big spectacle and poor storytelling has become common with many blockbusters, as Alexander Hulls wrote in 2015. Thanks to a growing emphasis on mass destruction in recent years, blockbusters have started to feel like they're not so much facilitating childlike states as they are regressing into them. And this is something that I think persists throughout a lot of big action blockbusters of recent years. I mean, look at a movie like Skyscraper. Deeper elements of storytelling are clearly being overlooked here so they can make The Rock punch some guys and then jump off a crane because it looks really cool. Part of what allows these movies to have these big spectacles are the stakes. Stakes are an important part of any film, let alone a movie like Jurassic Park or Jurassic World. If everything went wrong in Jurassic World and they can't stop the dinosaurs, thousands of people are going to die. Those are the stakes. But here's the thing. If everyone dies in Jurassic Park, that's just it. Those 10 people are dead. But it mattered because the spectator got to know these characters and care about them. Jurassic Park easily could have had the same stakes as Jurassic World. I mean, they had an island full of people that work there, but they made the point of getting all of them off on a boat before any of the action started to happen, so that they could have these more character-driven action scenes, instead of big, flashy, and meaningless action scenes. I made my sister watch this movie a week ago, and she said if Tim dies, she's gonna hate me for making her watch this. Because that's the thing, if the trolley problem takes place in an entirely fictional world, audiences would rather run over 5 random characters to save the one they care about. I mean, the MCU isn't necessarily the best example of good stakes, but in Avengers Infinity War, people didn't cry at the final scene because millions of people across the world died. They cried because the characters they had come to care for were dying. People just wouldn't care enough if the characters lived or died in Jurassic World, so they have to tell audiences that they should care because of the world-ending stakes. This all even ties back into the flashiness of the movie too, because if they have a bunch of random characters that the audience doesn't especially care about, they can just kill them for a cheap thrill, and no one will be overly upset. But they'll still have the same excitement of a flashy death. The last difference between Jurassic Park and Jurassic World that illustrates the decline of the blockbuster is one of the most common complaints about a lot of the big movies hitting theaters in the past few years, and that's that so many of them are remakes, reboots, or sequels. I mean, most often this has been discussed with Disney's live-action remakes, but it can be seen across studios and across genres with upcoming films like The Batman, Space Jam 2, or Halloween Kills. Though by no means am I saying that all remakes and reboots are bad. The right film can do justice to the original while bringing something new to the story. But for me, Jurassic World just doesn't do this. Though it's technically a sequel, it feels a lot like a soft reboot, and just hits too many of the narrative beats of the original to be interesting to me. And as I've talked about before, it just doesn't do them as well. Its sequel, Fallen Kingdom, is probably a worse movie objectively, but I honestly enjoyed it a lot more because it did something new with the franchise. And look, I know the original movie was based off a book, but they changed the story significantly from the book that it feels different. It's honestly probably the only movie I actually enjoyed more than the book. As well, it used the medium of film so well that it made it its own. There was and still is a genuine excitement that comes from seeing dinosaurs on the big screen in such a photorealistic way that was pretty revolutionary for the time. Jurassic World just doesn't give you that same feeling. It feels like Universal just realized with new CGI technology, some cool dinosaurs, draw in some people with the nostalgia of the original, and use Chris Pratt's rising star power to make a lot of money. And again, they did. So they decided to do it 2 more times. The studio's desire for money is felt in the movie, and it just makes it feel hollow. What makes it even more egregious is the ridiculous amount of product placement. The original Jurassic Park in many ways was a huge critique on capitalism.
And we can charge anything we want, $2,000 a day, $10,000 a day, and people will pay it. And then there's the merchandise. I can prove
But Jurassic World quite literally
read what others had done, and you took the next step. You didn't earn the knowledge for yourselves, so you don't take any responsibility for it. You stood on the shoulders of geniuses to accomplish something as fast as you could, and before you even knew what you had, you patented it and packaged it and slapped it on a plastic lunchbox, and now you're selling it. You want to sell it. Well,
I mean, it's not like the original didn't make me want a Jeep or a Ford Explorer, but there's a key difference in the way that these cars are shot. And there's even just some gaudy shots that look straight out of a commercial, which completely undercut whatever the film is trying to say about corporations.
Verizon Wireless presents the Indominus Rex.
Oh, that is so terrible.
They try to hide this hollowness with the nostalgia of the original. You might not really care about Zack and Gray's story, but to get you invested in their parts, you can look at all the Easter eggs and callbacks to the original. And maybe if they associate themselves with the original, some of the good feelings you have towards it will transfer onto the new film. This film also relies on the nostalgia for the original through its score. Part of what makes the original film so great, in my opinion, is John Williams' beautiful score. Jurassic World reuses a lot of the themes from the original, but instead of enhancing the scenes, they just make me immediately draw a comparison to the scene in the original that uses the same theme, and by comparison, Jurassic World just always falls flat. Let's take a look at 2 parallel scenes side by side.
Welcome to Jurassic Park.
Dude, she said we had to wait.
I don't want to wait anymore.
The decision by studios to greenlight reboots and sequels instead of original ideas is quite similar to Scorsese's views on the streaming algorithms. If further viewing is suggested by algorithms based on what you've already seen, and the suggestions are based solely on subject matter or genre, then what does that do to the art of cinema? Except in this scenario, it's not an algorithm deciding to give you the content, it's studios continually making films that were successful in the past and that people went out to see, instead of trying to give audiences a new experience, which turns the art of, well, let's say the Blockbuster, into a machine that just keeps pushing out the same old formulas. And that's just the thing. It feels like the main problem beneath all of these issues is the drive for money. Well, it's true that blockbusters were always not entirely an artistic product, but a commercial one, meant to produce money and cover the expenses of those films that have not reached the break-even point, as well as those projects that have been stopped during their development, pre-production, or filming, thus producing no income but only costs. It feels like studios have realized that they can still make a lot of money by just recycling old stories or tropes, and as long as they're interesting to look at, a lackluster narrative won't affect ticket sales, especially with franchise films that already have an established audience. Scorsese isn't the only one who feels that studios are only looking to make franchise films for maximum profits. David Fincher recently stated that unless you're making a tentpole movie that has a Happy Meal component to it, no one's interested. While I don't think blockbuster movies will ever be the art of cinema that Scorsese talks about, I think studios need to start recognizing that at their core, these are films, and deserve to be properly treated as such, with an emphasis on the elements of film, other than the flashy spectacle. And I really hope they figure that out before putting the characters from the original that I, and I'm sure many other people, loved into the final Jurassic World movie. If you have any thoughts or comments on anything I've said, I'd love to hear what you think in the comments. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching my video.